Hello world, I'm Whitney Bandel and welcome to another video from my HTML and CSS course. In this video we will be looking further at cascading style sheets, in particular working with graphics and text. So last time I encountered a bit of a problem with saving my Sublime files. And so if you are having a similar issue, I just want to kind of talk you through what we can do to work with it. So if I go to File, Save, let's just say I'm going to save to my desktop, I have this option as saving the type. Now this should work where I should be able to just click on HTML. And what I was noticing was that when I would click Save, I was getting a generic file type. It looks like it's working right now. So we're going to go back to File, Save As. I'm going to choose a different name. I'm going to switch this to all files. So another method I could use is homepage and then typing in .html. I could hit save here and it'll again save an HTML file. So if for some reason yours is saving as a generic file type where it doesn't have this extension, you can do this to save your files. I'm going to open these in a window so we can take a look at this a little bit further. One thing I was noticing, let me see if I can actually bring one of these back. So this is how it was saving, was I just had this page, even though I saved it as an HTML, for some reason it wasn't actually saving with that extension. It's just calling it a generic file type. So you want to be able to choose a view that's going to give you information. I would suggest looking at the details. Here you can see that we actually have graphic icon differences, but the file type is kind of a giveaway. Right now it's showing it based off of what my default browser is, which is set to Firefox. Something that you want to make sure you have, go to View and make sure you have file name extensions on here. So if you don't, you can't actually see what sort of file type you have. So you want to make sure you go to file name extensions, and this will give you a clue as well as to what these are saved as, and if they're saved appropriately. We could do the same thing. I could create a new page, save as styles.css. And then once I save that, you should see an icon next to it that shows up in that extension name. So if for some reason choosing save as and using the save as type isn't working, you can type it in. What you want to avoid though is you don't want to have something like index.html.html. I've had students end up with this happening instead. So if you are having a problem, I would switch this to all files so it's not trying to add anything to the end, and then just type in index.html. So I'm probably going to do this while I'm making files just in case I have that same error again. If you aren't having that error, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. I haven't had this problem before, but I was having it in the last video that I was recording. So as a precaution, this is what I'm going to do. So I don't actually need these files. We're going to be doing something else. You can go ahead and open up Sublime to work with. I want you to open up Canvas and we're going to take a look at some files. You'll notice from the last video we have some resources. We have CSS Design Garden. There's also this list of different web save colors, which will give you the breakdown of the hexadecimal number and then also the RGB values. And then here's a list of the color names that are often used in text editors. I can't guarantee that all of these will work, but you could try typing in these names and seeing if they actually do show up. Or again, they have the hexadecimal values as sort of a backup option. And then our CSS validator, and the rest of these we're going to take a look at in this video. So I want you to go to Files, I'm going to just make this full screen. We have a bunch of folders in here, and there's going to be some files that you might need throughout the class, especially for working on your assignments, especially when we're working with graphics. So for example, for assignment 5, I have a folder in here that has the images for working with assignment 5. You can also get these from the textbook, but as an alternative, I have a couple of these. So sometimes we might have some demos where I want you to go in here and download some files. So here I have week 6. I want you to download this folder. So you can go to these 3 dots, click download. I'm going to do save file. We're not going to work with these right away. I'm going to move this out of the way. I'm just going to drag this to the desktop to work with. So we have a couple different types of images in here. These are going to be straight from your textbook anyways, and from the examples in the chapter that you're going to be looking at next. So these are handy to have anyways. Let's go ahead and create a folder to work with. Call this fonts. And then we're going to open up Sublime, create a new file, go to save. And you could try going ahead and just doing typical save as HTML. I'm going to just type it in because I'm not going to trust mine to save this right. I'm going to call this index, then .html, save that to the font folder, create a new file. I'm going to save this in the same folder. I'm going to type in styles.css. And then we should see in the bottom that these should switch to HTML and CSS, and if they don't, you can click on this and switch them out. And then I'm going to open my index page in browser window so we can look at these side by side. Alright, so we have our 2 files. Let's go ahead and start with our index page. You can use your template if you would like. We'll just go ahead and fill this out. Make sure you add a comment at the top. Alright, so we're going to add a title. Let's call this font family. I'm going to add our meta character set. We'll link to our style sheet. Which is called styles. They should be in the same folder, so we shouldn't need to go into a folder for your style sheet. Sometimes you might have a particular folder that's just for CSS styles, so you might see the need to actually add in more information. So we're going to go to the body section, and we're going to create a couple headings and paragraphs. So in H1 that says this is my heading text. H2, this is my subheading text. Paragraph, this is my paragraph text. Another paragraph, this is my second paragraph. And then a third one, this is my third paragraph. We can hit save and then refresh. And so we can see everything. You might get this message. This says that I'm using a trial version of Sublime Text. It's an unregistered evaluation version. There's no time limit on it. So if you want, you can purchase Sublime when you're using it, or you can just keep saying cancel. We're going to hit cancel. All right, so we could add our styles and embed them. For practice, especially because all of your homework is going to use external style sheets, we're going to actually add these styles over here. Let's start with a comment, your name and date. Let's do a style for H1 and H2. We'll do font family. So this will be the font family property. And then what you will typically do is choose several fonts to work with. So if somebody doesn't have a font supported on their computer, there's a couple of fallback options. We'll choose Georgia as our first font choice, and then as a fallback option, we'll choose Times New Roman. If you have a font that is several words, then you need to put the title of it in quotes. We can also write this with single quotes, but they need to match. Then we can do a comma, and then we can say that by default, if none of these are available, then we want to actually use a serif font instead. And we can actually hit return just so we can see that a little better. Alright, so next we're going to do styles for our paragraph. So we'll type in font family. We'll choose Verdana, Arial, and then sans serif as a fallback option. If you remember to our video on web design, you will remember that serif fonts have the decorative ends to them, and they're a little bit harder to see on screen devices, and so they work fine for shorter bits of text like headings, but they're not ideal for paragraphs. So for example, over here, where right now the default for the browser is everything is a serif font, and so we're going to replace that with a couple sans serif font options. So we can hit save and then refresh, and we'll see that we have a serif font for our headings, and then we have a sans serif font for our paragraphs now. Let's go back to our index page, and let's actually type in some of this information in our notes. So let's remove these paragraphs and headings, and instead let's write H1 and we'll say CSS fonts. And then let's do an H2, and let's say types of fonts. And then let's put in an unordered list, because these don't necessarily have to go in any particular order. Create line item, we'll say serif, sans serif, monospace, cursive, fantasy. So these are just a couple of different types that are kind of within their own little groupings. Some of these might have a bit of overlap to them, but these can be helpful terms for you to look up different types of fonts. We're going to focus mostly on just the first two, serif and sans serif. After a list, we could add in a little paragraph reminder saying serif fonts are best used for print media. Sans serif fonts are best used for screen media. You can use sans serif fonts for paragraphs and serif fonts for headings. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't use a sans serif font for a heading, but if you wanted to use something more decorative, that would be a place that you could do it. So I'm going to save and refresh so we can kind of see. We haven't styled our unordered list, so it's still defaulting. So we could go in and change that as well. Go to our style, and we could do p, ul, save that, refresh, and now we have our unordered list items are also going to be a sans serif font. So let's scroll down a little bit. So after our paragraph, I'm going to create a return just so that way we have a little bit of space. So you know kind of what we've already done and what we're doing next. So here we'll do font size as a second heading, and then we'll put our notes about different font sizes. So let's make another unordered list. And here we will say different ways of making font sizes. So you can write in words like x hyphen small, xx small, medium, and these will change the size of your fonts. These are going to depend on what your browser and your device categorizes these as, so it's going to depend on the default browser sizes. So you don't necessarily have control over exactly how these are going to look, but they are an option. You can also specify by the pixel size. You can specify by point size. Pixel is going to be a dimension that's going to be more of a fixed size, so it's always going to be the same size, which isn't going to be the best for having responsive design. Point is a carryover from graphic design and working with sizes that are going to be printed out. So it's kind of similar to pixel, and that's more of a fixed size. Ems. This comes from the idea of printing, and it's measurements that are based off of the width of M. These are going to be flexible depending on the device. And so I'm going to suggest that for responsive design that you predominantly use Ems, or you can also use percentages. So we can hit save, refresh this. So now we have our list. Let's create a description list. So we're going to add DL, and then we're going to want to have our term, then our definition or our data, and we're going to want to have these in sets. So, and actually, after our list, let's create a second header. And let's call this font properties. Would probably be a good way of categorizing this information. So we'll type in font weight. And then for our definition, we'll say the font weight property, property sets how thick or thin characters and text should be displayed. So the idea here is whether or not something is going to be bold. So we could say an example would be making text bold. Okay, let's create another pair. This time we'll do font style, and then the description. The font style property specifies the font style for a text. An example would be making text italic or oblique. Let's save this and take a look at it so far. And it looks like I'm missing my end tag for DD. Let's check this one. Make sure we have our NDD tag. Sometimes I forget them, especially because this program is sort of adding them as I go. It's hard to remember when they're not. That's kind of why I prefer just not having it do that at all, so that way I always know to do it myself. Alright, we're going to make another term. This time we'll do line height. Do a term. Type in the line height property. Specifies the height of a line. This can be written as normal, a percentage, or a ratio. Alright, so let's create another term. This time we'll do text align. And we'll put left. The text can be aligned so that it is left aligned, centered, right aligned, or justified. We'll do another term. We'll add in text decoration. Text decoration can be none, underline, overline, or line through. Now, text decoration can actually be really helpful when you are trying to remove an underline on a link. So that way, if you wanted to create more of a button type aesthetic, let's say you're wanting to create a link in a navigation and you didn't want the underline, instead you wanted to give it more of a style of a button and just make it look more sizable and more like a shape that's clickable, then you might want to remove the underline. Save, refresh again. Alright, so we'll do another term. Text indent. And when you are actually typing these properties in, you want to make sure that they actually are lowercase, that they don't have the uppercase letters. I'm just doing this because they're headings. So here we'll say the text indent property specifies the indentation of the first line in a text block. We'll add another term, text transform. We'll type in the text transform property controls the capitalization of text. It includes uppercase, lowercase, and capitalize. Let's add another term, letter spacing. And we'll say the letter spacing property increases or decreases the space between characters in a text. So we could experiment a little bit with these. So let's see, where could we start? We've already worked with different types of fonts. We could take a look at font size. So let's add a style that's just for the paragraph, and then one that's just for, whoops, I meant to do unordered list. So that way here we could do font size, and we could say that we want this to be, just say small. And then maybe we want the font size here to be extra small. So let's save this and take a look at what happens. It's almost a little too small, so we might actually change this to medium. And then this one to small. So that way they look a little bit different. There might not be too much difference in comparison to the browser defaults, but this just gives you an idea of how they're actually going to be applied. We could actually go to our description list. Let's do our terms. Let's say we want the font size to be large. I might change my mind on this. And then definitions, let's do medium. So that way they kind of stand out a little bit. What we could also do for this is we could add in font weight. We could have the font weight be bold, so those pop a little bit more. We could have, just for practice, it's not going to be the best for legibility. I would suggest if you have a lot of text that you don't italicize it, but just for practice we'll do font style, italic. So our description definitions are going to all be italic. Let's do our headings. And we'll say text align center. So all of our headings will actually be in the center. So we can kind of browse the information that way. Actually, let's remove that. Let's instead add a style just for the H1. And here, let's do text align, center. Because I think I do prefer the second headings to be on the left and just the title in the center. We could try out line height. I'm thinking for line height, I want to use this here. Just to give a little bit more space and make it a little easier to read. So another way we could do this is by adding padding. So what would actually happen is if our text wraps around, there's going to be more space between these lines than, like, let's say one of these paragraphs. And we could actually do the same thing for like our unordered lists. Like, this makes it a little bit harder to read. Text decoration. Let's see. We could do, let's add an underline to our H2. To kind of give it a little bit more emphasis. Let's also do a text indent on our H2. And I'm gonna just have to kind of eyeball this. I'm not exactly sure what I want. That way they're kind of indented in further than the rest of the information, kind of like when you're starting a new paragraph. I may or may not like how this looks. I didn't like it quite being to the left. I don't like the unordered lists being further out though. Let's play around. That doesn't look too bad. Let's try 25. I think we'll go with that for now. Text transform. We could do this for our H1. So what's handy about this is, let's say you had your style sheet and somebody had already written all the copy for you. You are copying and pasting it directly from a Word document. You could type in text transform and then specify, we could say uppercase, and it could turn all of the information in those headings so that way it was all uppercase. Or one thing that I've seen as kind of a popular trend right now, text transform lowercase. So we could add in some letter spacing, maybe on our H1. Let's try this. So we'll just kind of stretch out the letters, change the spacing between individual characters. Alright, so I think this is going to cover everything for working with fonts. Next, I want us to take a look at some images and how to work with them. Let's go ahead and hit save. Alright, so make sure you have both of these saved. And we're going to go ahead and close these out. We're going to start working with that other folder that has the week 6 files in it. Probably what's going to be easiest for us to do is go to File, New, and let's call this images dot HTML. And I'm going to save this just directly into week 6, so that way we don't have to worry about linking all these images. And then I'm going to go into week 6, find this, open it up, so we can take a look at these at the same time. Again, you can use your template if you would like to. Let's call the title Images. And rather than creating a style sheet, let's just create some embedded styles if we need to. So in the body section, we're going to just go ahead and type up our notes as we go along, and then we're going to work with our images. So I want us to take a look at some common file types for images. So let's create an H1 heading, call this images, and then we'll do an H2, and we'll say common image file formats. These are specific to images. And then let's create another unordered list. And we'll type in GIF. And we're going to kind of write some benefits to each of these. So for GIFs, they are lossless, they allow transparency, animation, and 256 different colors. Next is going to be JPEG, which is going to be lossy. It does not provide transparency. It does not provide animation, but does provide millions of color options. PNG files, lossless, allows transparency, doesn't allow animation, and it does have millions of color options. So there are more file types than these, but these are going to be 3 that you will often work with. Alright, so if we take a look at the difference between a GIF, a PNG, and a JPEG image, we have kind of a list of how they're different. I'm going to start with PNG files and JPEG files because they are very similar in the types of images you'll use. JPEG images are going to be what you're typically going to use for photographs that are going to have a lot of colors represented in them. They're going to be files that are not going to be animated, and there's going to be no transparency. And an example of what that means is even if you have a file that has nothing in the background, like if we take a look at this recycling image, on the left we have a JPEG, which when brought in front of a different color background actually has a white background within the rest of the shape. So it doesn't work very well for layering over top of other files. If it's a photo where the whole container is actually filled up, it's not noticeable. But with something where you do want to layer over top of something else, it ends up looking better if it's saved as a PNG file, which a PNG file does allow for transparency. So it works really well when you want to layer multiple images over top of each other. We can take a look at this example here where we have a couple of apples, where if we were to view these in a photo editing software, the JPEG would have that white background, and then how we can tell if the PNG actually has transparency is there will usually be some sort of filler background, in this case a checker print, that just lets you know that there's nothing in that background space. And so here, if we layered this over another picture, we could actually create maybe a collaged image where these could overlap with each other. Maybe we could make it look like it's on a plate. This can only be seen as an apple that's over a white box. So GIF images you are probably familiar with because they are essentially these little short videos that loop, that a lot of times people will take clips from popular TV shows or from maybe other types of little animations, or even create their own by drawing things out. And these can be used as a way to have animation if you wanted to. They also allow for transparency. And then one of the limitations, though, is there is a smaller choice of color palette. So you can only represent 256 colors in the image. So if you kind of look closely, I don't know, we can't really make this bigger, but there's actually a lot of poor value gradation in the actual image. It kind of works because this image has a lot of gray in it, and so most of the color is being used in that grayscale, so you can kind of cut back a little bit. If you are trying to represent 256 colors of grayscale, you can actually have a full spectrum of value. So in this case, most of the color is either in the kind of red-yellow range, or it's going to be in that grayscale. So it's not too bad, but you will notice that it looks a little bit off in some areas. There is a movement with GIFs to use them as a in-between with photography and video. So trying to think of the benefits of not having to host an entire video or have a video where somebody has to actually play it and just have kind of looping information. Maybe it's a banner ad. A lot of photographers will use GIFs as a way of exploring having some information in motion while other information is actually masked out so it stays put. So I would encourage you to take a look at cinemagraphs. I usually have students explore cinemagraphs a little bit in my digital media courses. So these can be kind of fun to create as well. And then they take up a lot less space than a typical video would. And it's just kind of a nice little looping video. So if we take a look at the folder, we'll notice that a lot of the files are actually saved as GIF types, and that's because the file sizes can be really small. So GIFs also work really well for files that are going to be small and are going to use fewer colors. If we look at this again, they allow for animation and transparency, and they are lossless. So in this file, we have a bunch of different images which are going to be used as buttons, and then we have a couple of images which can be brought in to work throughout the page. These are examples from your textbook, and if you follow along with their examples, they'll actually show you how you can use these in a project. Some of the files that I was most interested in taking a look at are these two color images, which allow for you to easily create background colors that will fill in and repeat. And they're a nice example of how you can use a small file repeatedly and create a desired look without having to use a larger file type if you plan it out properly. So this will make a little bit more sense once we start taking a look at them. But I just wanted you to see that you can use GIFs for more than just images that are animated. Alright, so we are going to add images in here. I'm going to hit save, refresh, so we can actually see our notes. And then after our ordered list, let's go ahead and add in an image. So we're going to type in IMG, and then SRC is going to be source. And then this is where we are going to locate what our source is going to be. So if I look at folder, let's choose fishingboat.jpg. So bring this in, and we can specify the height if we know what it is or what we want it to be. I don't remember the particular height. I'm going to just do 200. With the height and width, we can only specify pixels here. This is another instance where it's actually better to change the dimensions in your CSS rather than having them in your HTML. So we can say what we want it to be, and this actually helps when our code is running. Even if the image hasn't loaded yet, there's a placeholder already for that that's going to be designated that needs to take up 200 by 500 pixels. But in the future, I would suggest putting the sizes over in your CSS instead. I just want you to know how to write it. So we're going to have our height and width, and then we're going to add our alternative description. So you need to have this to make your websites accessible. So this needs to be a text that will match what the picture is. So we could just say a fishing boat in the sea. So let's go ahead and hit save, refresh. It looks like it's a little bit too wide, so I might change this. Let's see what 300 looks like. I think that's closer to the original ratio. So 200 by 300. And you'll notice, so actually I forgot my greater than symbol. But image is one of the few elements where we're not actually going to have a beginning and end tag. We're just going to have everything all in one element tag. So you need to keep that in mind. We can use images as links. So if you think back to that file, we had a couple of different links that we could create. Let's see what the names of them are. Contact, home, services. So let's use some of our semantic HTML, and we'll create a navigation. And then since all of this is going to be lower down, we'll put it in the main section. I'm going to indent this for the sake of knowing what's contained inside of what. So for our nav, we want to have home. Let's see, what was it? It was home, contact services. So I'm just using this as a placeholder for now. What we're going to do is essentially replace this with what we actually want. So we'll create our link first, which these links aren't going to work because we don't have these pages, but this is how we would type it in. So we would do let's say this is going to be home.html. And then inside of here, instead of having our text, instead we'll say image source equals home.gif, I believe it was. And then we'd have an alternative description that will say home, so that way if somebody's using an assistive technology, it'll let them know that that's going to be the home page. You might even say home button, so that they know that it's a button. And then we do the same thing for the rest. Do contact.html image source equals contact gif alt contact button services So I'm going to hit save and we'll refresh this. So we still have this text from before, and then we have our 3 buttons. And what we could do is I could just highlight this and delete it, or maybe instead I'll just do a block comment real quick. So that way if I wanted to go back, I could. So here we have our 3 buttons, and they link to the appropriate places. Since they don't exist, we're not actually going to be able to see them though. So you can also do a lot more with linking images. We could actually use this as a way to have a thumbnail where you could have a smaller image preview, and then you could actually make it so that when you click on it, it just opens the file directly, and or maybe it opens up a larger version of that image as a file. We'll take a look at that later in a further chapter where we're going to take a look at creating gallery images. Now, we can also create backgrounds using images. So we're going to go to our style section. And here we are going to create a style for the body. And we're going to say background image colon URL. And then we're going to put in parentheses. And you want to make sure there's no space in between here. Like I said, for some reason with CSS, if there's something in parentheses, it really wants everything to be touching, versus the rest of the time, white space doesn't really matter. Let's see what we have. To color. So we're going to type in to color.gif, save this, and repeat. And so we have this striped background. You'll notice there was 2 different options in the folder. There's this one that has a thin dark green stripe and then a wider one. If we swapped this to 1, hit save, refresh. Whoops, I put that one in the wrong spot. Now it's going to bring up this one where the stripe is going to go the other direction. So depending on the image you have, you could do something quite complex. So instead of actually having to create a large image, you can make the smallest size image possible and then just have it repeat. We're going to take a look at how we can work with repeating. So I'm going to switch back to the first one. And then after this line, I'm going to say background repeat. We can say repeat Y. And so instead of repeating across the whole page, now it's just going to repeat this going all the way down. Again, if we swap here, it's going to alternate in a different kind of pattern. We could change this to X. So here we could create just like a really long double line. If I switch this, now we have kind of this nice repeating border. I think I kind of like this one the most. We can set this to no repeat, so we could just have it show up once. In the top corner, or we could do repeat, which is the default where it just repeats both X and Y. So I think I'm just going to leave this with repeat X, so that way it's just going along the top. We can also do background position. So what that would look like. You can choose left, top, center, bottom, or right. So you can play around with that as well. Next, we're going to move on to working with list markers and then working with some of those images that we had. So let's create, I'm going to scroll down. After our image, let's create another H2 heading, and we'll call this list markers with CSS. And then we'll create a paragraph and say list style type allows you to style using none, disk, circle, square, decimal, upper, alpha, lower alpha, lower Roman. We worked with style type a little bit when we've created ordered lists. Next, we're going to take a look at using an image. So we can write list style image allows you to use an image with your lists. Let's do another paragraph and we'll say list style position allows you to state if the position is inside or outside. So we're going to play around with a few of these. So if we go back to our styles, we'll create a new style for our unordered list. I wanted to make sure it's first that we had one, which we do at the top with the GIF, JPEG, and PNG. And we'll say UL, and we'll say list style image, colon URL, make sure it's touching, then parentheses. Let's see what we have in this folder. We We have the Trillium GIF. So let's do that. Let's save that and refresh. And now we'll see that instead of our regular bullet points, we instead have this image used. So if you wanted to create your own little bullet point markers, you could create those. Another way that you can add graphics to your page is with a favorites icon. So I'm going to scroll down again. Let's do their H2. We'll say favorites icon, then paragraph, and then say a favorites icon. I'm going to put in parentheses fav icon. Allows you to add an icon to the tab of your browser page. So if we were to go to, well, actually we can actually see it right here. So a favorites icon will show up as a way to kind of personalize your page in the head information. So if you remember, the head information is what's communicated to the browser versus this information in the body is the visuals. So if we add a favorites icon, we can actually have it added to the tab. So this makes it a lot easier when people have a bunch of tabs open and they want to quickly identify what page they're going to. If all of your pages have your own little iconed branding, they'll know which page they're looking at. So it's a nice little way to add more branding to your website and to make it easier for people to identify your information. So we're going to go ahead and add a favorites icon. So I'm going to type in link rel, and we're going to say icon this time. And then we're going to reference favicon.ico. We're going to say type equals image / X icon. We'll hit save, refresh. So you won't see anything here, but you should see the icon now show up in your tab if you save and refresh your page. So I have some links in Canvas that will allow for you to look at these a little bit more. These are kind of helpful for creating your own favorites icon. So this gives you a little bit of space. We also have this option for using animation, so kind of drawing in this grid. Here we have a favorites icon generator. So you can work with an image to create an icon from, to create an icon if you wanted to. Here we have kind of another tool for drawing around, X icon editor. So I would suggest using these in the future or looking for icons that will make sense, especially when you're working with your midterm or your final project. So there's another topic that is in your textbook that I want us to take a look at, but I think will be easier to look at if we use some code that already exists and you don't have to download anything additional. So if you go back to Canvas and you look under resources, kind of in the middle we have HTML map tag. And we're going to take a look at this. So this takes a look at the map element, which lets you configure an image with multiple clickable or selectable areas that link to another web page or website. You can create selectable areas as hotspots. You can use different shapes, so rectangles, circles, or polygons. In this example that I have from the W3 Schools website, there's rectangles and circles. And you'll kind of see how they're written out. So for example, for the first rectangle, we have different coordinates, and the order it goes into is you define the first x coordinate, and then the y coordinate, and then the x2 coordinate, and then the y2. For circle, you look at the xy position and then the radius, so how far out from the radius it's going to be in size. So here we have the image source, which is calling up this first image. We have the map name, which is just going to be this map element, which is going to be this space in general, and then it's giving it a name. And then we have 3 area shapes that are defined with coordinates. They have descriptions to go along with them: Sun, Mercury, and Venus. And then we have links to the actual images. So this Sun image is actually a link to an image, Mercury, Venus, and then this is how you would place it in your text. Your textbook has another example of this. I like this one. So with the rectangle, this works really well with this image because even though it doesn't quite fill up this whole shape, it's pretty close to being the size of a rectangle. If we click on it, it will take us to another image of the sun. We can refresh. Here we can click on this tiny spot. It ends up being a little difficult because if someone's using a mouse, they have to really aim very carefully. But we can click on these different pictures and create kind of a fun interactive image to work with. So you can use mapping to specify particular areas. There's also other tools you can use once you work with other languages that can kind of do this, I would say, a little better. Like when you start working with JavaScript, you can work with the canvas area, and it can be a little bit easier to actually map all these things out. You have to be kind of careful too with working with mapping, because when you're working with mapping, you are requiring the website to provide a fixed area. And as we've talked about in the past, responsive design is ideal for working with a bunch of different platforms. So when you create a map and you have these fixed coordinates, you make it a lot more difficult to allow this design to work in a responsive way. So I'd be very careful with using this as a way to create interactive websites. An example of something I've done, this is similar to what we did with the buttons that we worked with for the code over here. So here you have these icon buttons that you can use. I did a similar thing with this site where these circles are cut out and the images themselves, just like this here we have a link, and then we're saying that the image itself is going to be linked. Here I just have these 2 circle images, and if I were to click on them, they would take me to, for example, the fine art page, or if I click on this one, it'll take me to the design page. And then what I've done is I've created a hover option where if I hover over it, it displays a different picture, just so it looks a little bit more interactive. This up here is an example of something that was created with JavaScript and using the canvas space, where I'm able to bring in some pictures and then work with graphics and transform them based off of the mouse position. So we'll talk a little bit more at the very end of the semester about resources you can look into if you are interested in doing more kind of interactive things with visual elements, but I wanted you to think about different ways that you might use graphics in an interactive way, and if you plan things out, you can actually create some really interesting visuals with really simple ideas. We're gonna open up a new file, and this time I actually do want everything to be in a folder together. So I'm actually gonna close these. And before we begin, I want to take a look at image optimization. If you go to week 5 on Canvas, I have some links that are going to be helpful for what we're going to cover in this video. I also have some files that I want you to download. So go ahead and download these 5 images: cat, panda, alpaca, giraffe, and koala. We're going to be using these for this next demo. And in the meantime, while you're downloading these, we're going to take a look at image optimization. This is a nice website that covers 10 must-know image optimization tips. So depending on what track you're following, whether you're working web development or digital media, you may or may not be directly responsible for the images you'll be working with. Maybe you're going to be working more on the code side of things, but it's still important for you to know how to optimize images and then how to ask people for optimized images. So this website will show you a couple of different tips. We'll just kind of scan through it and I'll fill in information kind of as needed. They have kind of a checklist of different items. Here they have name your images descriptively and in plain language. So this kind of goes back to that idea that we've talked about with search engine optimization, using keywords that people are going to perhaps look up. Here they have a couple of different examples of terms that people might use to look for the car that is above. So they're suggesting that it would be better to name this file 2012 Ford Mustang LX Red instead of kind of the default name that is usually assigned to the image when the person is taking the picture with a camera. The suggestion shows optimize your alternative text carefully. So making sure that your text is descriptive to what's in the picture. In this example, the text is pretty straightforward. It's really that same kind of information. Here they have some examples of what to do or what not to do. Describe your images in plain language. If you sell products that have model numbers or serial numbers, use them in your alt attributes. Don't stuff your alt attributes full of keywords. Don't use alt attributes for decorative images. Choose your image dimensions and product angles wisely. So this is going to be more of the advice for the person who's exploring digital media. But you want to consider the types of shots that you have and whether or not they make sense, and then how you're going to organize them on a page. Here they have some really good tips for working with larger images. Once we start working with images where we can resize them based off of the window size, you might feel tempted to use an image that's large and just shrink it down to be smaller on the page. But by linking to a larger image, you're actually going to increase your page's loading time. So you want to link to multiple pages depending on how large the window is going to be. This is going to make more sense, again, once we start working with media queries and being able to have separate style sets based off of our windows. Here that says reduce the file size of your images. Nearly 50% of consumers won't even wait 3 seconds for an e-commerce site to load. Amazon has found out that if their pages were to slow down by just 1 second, they would lose $1.6 billion a year. So being able to load your page quickly is vital to having a successful website. So here they have some advice on what you can do to reduce the image file size. And this includes saving your image for web. If you have worked with Photoshop at all or another photo editor, you might have encountered the option for saving a file and then being able to alternatively save for web. So these are directions that follow along with how to save images in Photoshop. If you take one of the digital media courses that covers Photoshop in this program, you will learn how to do this at some point. But what they recommend doing is trying to find a balance between the quality of the image. There's only going to be so much that we can actually see in the quality of an image on a screen versus it being printed out. So you can actually lower the quality, and here they're recommending to 70%, and trying to find that balance between how large the file has to be versus how much quality is going to be there. There's also a bit of optimizing the color range. So by reducing the range of colors, you can also kind of save space. This process is actually really similar to what you would do if you're saving a GIF. So here they have some general guidelines that you could follow. So I would suggest bookmarking this page and being able to reference it in the future. Here they have a couple of recommendations of different sites that you can use if you don't have access to Photoshop. Here they have suggestions how large should image files be. For e-commerce images, a good rule of thumb is to keep your image file below 70 kilobytes. Choose the right file type. So we've talked a little bit about the differences between JPEG, GIF, and PNG. Here they have some more information about these 3 different file types. So you could take a look at this kind of more in depth. You could take a look at this as well. Optimize your thumbnails. Many e-commerce sites will use thumbnail images, especially on category pages. They quickly showcase products without taking up too much real estate. So this gives you some advice on how to create thumbnails. Use image sitemaps. Beware of decorative images. Use caution when using content delivery networks. Test your images. So just some guidelines. The part that I wanted you to really consider is thinking about how to optimize your images and save them for the web, and then also thinking about your alternative text descriptions. So hopefully by now you have downloaded these files. Alright, so next we're going to be taking a look at using images with figure and figure caption elements. So you should have those images downloaded, and what I would like for you to do is create a folder. I'm going to call this animals. Inside of the folder I have another folder that is called images. Inside of images we have the 5 different images, and I have already gone and optimized these for us to use. They are all the same size, so they should work really well next to each other. We don't have any kind of awkward dimensions. I've already optimized the quality of them, taking into account how large they are going to be. So that's all already been done for you. We're going to open up Sublime and let's start a new file. Save as find our animals folder. Call this figure.html. And we'll go ahead and open our file in a browser so we can look at it at the same time. Let's title this images. And let's leave room for embedded styles. So we've worked with images before, and in this demo we are going to look at how we can use two elements that work together with images. The first is called figure, and then the second is called figure caption or fig caption. And these allow for an image to be structurally associated with text that accompanies it, in this case a caption. Technically you could create an image and put text next to it, but this structurally is going to show a relationship between the figure and the caption and pair them together with each other. So the structure for this is going to look like, we're going to just add this into the body section, is you would first create the figure element, and then inside you would create a figure caption. So within the figure you would link to an image. So I'm just going to place image there real quick, and then within the figure caption is where you could write, let's say we had title, artist, date. So this is kind of the structure that we are going to use with the page that we are going to create. So I'm going to remove this for now. We'll start off with the H1. We'll say animals. We'll create a figure. In our figure, we are going to link to one of our images. And we want to think about where the image is going to be in relation. So we need to go into the folder called, let's see, was it image or images? It was images. So we need to go into a folder called images. From there, let's take the cat image, and then we'll add a width of 300. Height 200. Do an alternative description. We'll say cat walking through grass. I'm not the best writer, so if you can come up with something that fits better, you could use a different description. Next, we're going to add our figure caption, where we'll have this the same on each. We'll say title, artist, and then date, and then we'll end our figure caption. And then we'll go ahead and do this for each of our pictures. So you could actually highlight this and copy it. Just make sure that you replace everything. So it's 3, 4, 5. So let's see, what other animals do we have in here? So our second one, we do alpaca. Here I have alpaca standing in snowy field. Giraffe. Giraffe standing in field. Koala. Koala sitting in tree. Let's see, what was that? Leaf. Panda. Panda laying on branch. So save that. Refresh. Now we have all of our animals. So images are going to display as inline. The figure is going to display as a block. So while we're used to our images being in line with each other and continuing across, now they actually are going to stack up on top of each other. So we could actually play around a little bit with how we want to style these images by using our CSS. So I'm going to add figure. Say float left. So now, as long as there is enough space on the screen, they are going to kind of fill in and they'll float to the left. And so I can kind of resize the window. So this is one way that you might make your page be responsive to the window size. You could also have your images scale depending on the window size. You can also add width 300 pixels. So rather than actually having the dimension here, we could actually remove these, and I would say it's going to be better to actually have your dimensions in your CSS rather than your HTML anyways. Let's add a margin, 10 pixels. So kind of saying specifically how much space we want between them. Let's add figure caption. Text align center. Font size. And I'm going to do 0.8 em. For your final project, you'll want to do all of your fonts in ems. do font style italic. It's kind of common when you're working with figures, especially in textbooks. And let's actually add a border so we can kind of see what's happening. Border 1 pixel solid. We'll just make it black. So here we actually have a box around. We can add a border around this as well. Border 1 pixel solid. We could remove this one and see what it looks like to just have the one. This actually kind of creates a nice look where we have the whole figure with the border around it and then just kind of a nice clean edge. We could change the background color. I think we could actually add a little bit more padding on here. Let's do padding 5 pixels. Maybe we want to change the font. Let's do font family Pyrus Fantasy. Kind of give it an aesthetic that kind of matches the animal pictures a little bit. If we wanted to, maybe we want a black line along the top. So maybe instead we do border top, then 1 pixel solid. Except for that kind of creates a weird line. I think I like it better without. You could also create a border around the image. Maybe that would give a cleaner look to it. Try that. So that looks a little nicer. So if you wanted there to be a line separating them, you could do that. That kind of makes it look a little bit more like a Polaroid. We could also add a shadow underneath to kind of make it look like it's standing out, kind of popping a little. So I'll let you kind of play around with the styles if you want to add anything more. This is everything we're going to go over for graphics and text.